This video is brought to you by John Robson Guitar Tuition. If you enjoy the content, please consider supporting the channel by enrolling on a course, purchasing some guitar lessons or a t-shirt, or you can join my Patreon. Now, on with the show. Hello chaps, welcome once again to John Robson Guitar Tuition. As always, and especially at the moment, I do hope you're well. Today is just another one of these little videos where I kind of blether on about music in some way, shape or form. And what I'm going to talk about today are albums that I really, really wanted to love, but couldn't quite manage it. A few of these date back to when I was a young man, which isn't the case anymore, as you can see. And you know that kind of thing when your mates know that you are into a certain artist or band, and they'll say, "Oh, have you heard the new one by such and such?" And you say, "Oh yeah, I bought it the other day." "Oh, what do you think? Is it any good?" "Yeah, it'll grow on me. Yeah, it'll get there." And because you're not willing to admit that your favourite band might have released something that's not quite up to the usual standard. It's in those days when you're a young lad, you have a sense of allegiance to a particular band or artist, I find, in much the same way as I'm told people have an allegiance to a football team. I'm not interested in football. It's 22 millionaires ruining a lawn, and that's pretty much all I can make of it. So anyway, we won't get into that. Let's start off talking about 5 albums that I really, really wanted to love, but couldn't quite manage it. And the first one is
After Hours, Gary Moore.
Okay, it's pretty difficult to overestimate the importance of the predecessor to this album, Still Got the Blues. I love that album. It was basically my favourite guitarist, my favourite rock guitarist, coming home to the blues, a style that I loved even more than, kind of rock music. And, it was just everything added up really to something greater than the sum of its parts. It remains one of my favourite albums. And, Then I read an article in Q magazine where they did a feature on Gary, and there was an interview about his new album, the follow-up to Still Got the Blues. And the great news was that he wasn't just going back onto his rock and metal kind of thing that he'd been doing in the 80s. This blues thing was now the career path that he was on, and it was just so great to hear that. Then a single came out in advance of the album, Cold Day in Hell. Fantastic song. And the B-side was like a live version of Stormy Monday featuring Albert King, and there was Gary and Albert King jamming, and it was magical. I was so excited to get my hands on this new album, which was going to be called After Hours. I found out the date it was going to be released, and that date on the calendar was circled in a big fat red magic marker. It was just something I was really looking forward to. It was like there was 2 Christmases that year. And when it came out, I went down to my local branch of, I think it was Alan Fernley's Records on Linthorpe Road in Middlesbrough. Handed over me money, got the album on CD. This was the era of CDs. And, bus ride home, and I'm reading the sleeve notes as you do, and anticipation was delicious. Got it home, put the album on, first track, Cold Day in Hell, good start. And then it just all sort of started sounding a bit samey and a bit like, okay, yeah, Still Got the Blues worked, and there was a spontaneity to that album, and what you've tried to do here perhaps is repeat the formula, and it just lacked that spontaneity. I think Still Got the Blues was recorded on something of a tight budget because the record company weren't really into the idea back then, and it was a surprise hit, so he got a bigger budget for After Hours, and it was just a bit too slick and a bit too polished. It just wasn't really as good, I didn't think. There was also evidence of something that I started to notice throughout the 90s in Gary's vocals, where something happened to his voice about then. It developed something of a nasal, kind of an unpleasant nasal timbre that kind of continued throughout his recordings, but oddly wasn't present in his live stuff. If you watch the One Night in Dublin thing, the Phil Lynott tribute, he sounds like he's singing great, but there was just something about the way his vocals were produced on the albums throughout the 90s and 2000s that I found a bit, not to me liking. I got to tell you, the After Hours album doesn't even exist in my MP3 library. There's a couple of tracks, Cold Day in Hell, and I think one other track from the album that's in a Gary Moore compilation that I put together. But as an album, it disappointed me, and I have no desire to revisit it, I'm afraid. Next.
Flying in a Blue Dream, Joe Satriani.
Okay, like all of the albums I'm talking about today, the sense of anticipation in the run-up to the release of this one was really something palpable, there was certainly a buzz going round that Joe Satriani had a new album coming out and it was going to be fantastic. The predecessor, Surfing with the Alien, it's an iconic shred guitar album, but for me, what set it apart from, the kind of Yngwie Malmsteens and Paul Gilberts and Tony McAlpines and Vinnie Moores of the world was that there was a strong melodic blues element going on in there. It was that kind of bluesiness that really kind of got under my skin. And, you could tell that Satriani had played a fair bit of blues in his time, but obviously with things like Satch Boogie that, that was just turbocharged blues rock guitar playing, fantastically so. So then, Flying in a Blue Dream came out, and to be fair, I think it suffered from a problem that many albums from that late 80s, early 90s period of music threw up. The compact disc, okay? There was, obviously CDs had been around for a while by then, but it was always like, and the album is also available on CD, so you get your vinyl and cassette album that they also put out on CD. But as soon as the CD becomes the default format for any album release, it's like, okay, guys, we've got 75 minutes worth of space on this format. Let's make 75 minutes of music. And yeah, there's a sense sometimes in a lot of albums from that period that the ideas were spread too thin, that there were too many songs, and there just wasn't a sense of focus that was maintained throughout the album. And that's certainly the case, I think, with Flying in a Blue Dream. Obviously, Surfing with the Alien became a big hit album and took everyone by surprise, not least, the Satriani's record company, who decided, let's cash in on this. Can you write a few hits, Joe? And, I'll tell you what, better still, can you kind of put a few vocal tracks on? And the resulting kind of album as a whole is a bit of an unfocused mishmash to my ears. It just doesn't work. Fortunately, Joe got his mojo back on the follow-up album from this, The Extremist, which I think is, just again one of his most fantastic albums. It's a classic rock and metal guitar album, again with that strong sense of bluesy, melodic, kind of background to it that just makes it all work. And it's a focused album that just hangs together in a way that Flying in a Blue Dream just doesn't. Next.
Kamakiriad, Donald Fagen.
Okay, yes. Now, once again, the sense of excitement, the buzz surrounding this album was something that, really got to me. Donald Fagen had only released one album since the demise of Steely Dan, the absolute masterpiece of an album that was The Nightfly. And not only was Donald releasing another album, but Walter Becker was producing it. Effectively, Steely Dan reunited, and they actually did a tour after the recording of this album as Steely Dan. It was the old firm back together, as it were. And more than any other album on this list, I really, really tried to love this one. but never quite got there. If you go back and listen to like classic Steely Dan albums, I'm thinking of, Pretzel Logic, Royal Scam, Can't Buy You Thrill, just all of the great albums that they did way back when. There was always a sense of joy about them, I thought, and that for me is lacking in this album. It's just a bit humourless. You've got track after track that's just this kind of bland white boy funk that sounds like it could have been the background music to an episode of Kojak in the 70s. And it's just, to me, the production of the album is very kind of flat sounding, and it just doesn't do anything for me. The thing that always drew me into a Steely Dan album in the old days were the hooks. There were lots of songs with great catchy hooks that kind of draw you in, and then you start listening over and over again. You discover the hidden depths of the music. But, all of that was missing from Kamakiriad. What can I tell you? I know there are some people out there who love it. I don't. That's all I can tell you about it. Next.
On Every Street, Dire Straits.
Okay, much like Flying in a Blue Dream that I mentioned earlier, I think the main problem with this album is that it's just too long. And the ideas are spread too thin. It's that whole kind of, hey, the CD, the compact disc, allows us to fit 75 minutes worth of music onto this format, so we need to make 75 minutes worth of music, or thereabouts. And yeah, it just lacked focus, and the ideas were spread too thin, and it just wasn't, I don't think, Dire Straits' finest hour. There's also something a little bit sterile in terms of the production on this album. I think it's just a bit flat and too perfect sounding, in a way that if you go back and listen to, the Dire Straits' eponymous debut album and maybe Making Movies or Love Over Gold, there's a sense of energy, and everybody in the studio is having a good time making this music, where it all just feels a little bit flat and humourless on this album, and it goes on longer than a night shift. It's just too long, and as a result, I don't think it worked. It also marked what I saw as the start of a new direction in Mark Knopfler's songwriting, where I don't think he was... let's say that the direction he was going in as a songwriter wasn't where I was willing to follow him. I bought another of his solo albums, not long after Golden Heart, when that came out. And again, it just, the songs, I didn't find them interesting to listen to or, engaging. And I kind of started losing interest in what Mark Knopfler did after that point there. I still love the early Dire Straits stuff, say from, kind of the first album up to, but maybe not including Brothers in Arms. But, this album, again, the excitement about it was, the Dire Straits, this was like, I think, was it 91 this album came out, and they'd not done anything since the mid-80s, and apart from one reunion gig that they did at the Nelson Mandela tribute concert, I think 88, they'd been, pretty much absent from the public eye. And, we were all kind of waiting for this new album from, a band that we'd loved so much. And this was the one that they came out with, and it was a bit of a damp squib, I've got to tell you, certainly as far as I'm concerned. So there you go, On Every Street. Next.
The Endless River, Pink Floyd.
Okay, it was clear from the outset with The Endless River that it was an album full of previously unreleased material and outtakes, and that is seldom a good formula for an album, is it? When you're kind of essentially sifting through the sweepings up from the cutting room floor. However, some great albums, or one album in particular, springs to mind that was a masterpiece of an album, came out like that. I'm thinking of the posthumous Stevie Ray Vaughan album, The Sky Is Crying, second only to Couldn't Stand the Weather. That is my one of my favourite Stevie Ray Vaughan albums. So I was prepared to give them the benefit of the doubt with this, and thinking, well, A, David Gilmour doesn't need the money, and B, he's, artistically not likely to release something that isn't, worthy of the Pink Floyd name. And then I listened to it, and it's like every song is like an intro in search of a song. Do you know what I mean? If you take something like the intro to Shine On You Crazy Diamond, the song doesn't work without that intro, and the intro doesn't work if it doesn't go into the actual song itself. And that, for me, is what this entire album is like. It's just a bunch of intros that never really seem to go anywhere. There's no real substance or heft, and none of the ideas seem to be, kind of fulfilled or developed. And as a result, it's an unfulfilling listen for me. I would much rather have preferred the Division Bell to be, the coda of the Pink Floyd body of work. I think that's... I wasn't that keen on Momentary Lapse of Reason. That essentially to me sounded like a David Gilmour solo project. Nothing wrong with that. It just didn't sound like a Pink Floyd record. But the Division Bell to me did sound like a Pink Floyd album, and still does. The Endless River, to me, sounds exactly like what it is. It's just, just outtakes and unfinished ideas all sort of cobbled together to put something out. And as a result, it just doesn't work, in my opinion. Feel free to disagree with me on that, or any of the choices I've made here, as I'm sure you will do in the comments section. Seriously, let me know what you think. If there are any albums that have had the same impact or lack of impact on you as the 5 that I've mentioned on this list here, let me know what they are. We can, have a bit of a chat about it. I'm sure we will do on the Friday live stream. Just mention that, 5 p.m. UK time on a Friday. We sit around and we have a beer and a chat and a laugh and discuss all of these kind of things. So, yeah. Let me know what you think. And that's pretty much it for today, folks. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and why not give me a like while you're at it. And I'll just mention before I go that if you're thinking of buying a Fret Zealot tuition aid, then use the discount code you can see on screen there, and the link in the description to make your purchase, and you'll get a little bit of money knocked off thanks to yours truly. You're welcome. And with that, I'll bid you all a good day and say thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your time, and I do look forward to seeing you all again next time around. So stay safe, stay well, and above all, stay sane, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now, folks.